My name is Monica Wilkinson Kelly. I'm the archivist at the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library in Over, New York. This interview is being conducted as part of the Cayuga and Seneca Lakes Agriculture and Craft Beverage Memory Project. Today is July 21st, 2022, and I'm interviewing Pam, Fred, and Noah Bassette of Airy Acres Vineyard. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so I'll start with Pamela. Could you say your full name and where you're from?
Yes, I can. Pamela Bassette, and I am from Interlake in New York, Airy Acres.
Okay, and
Fred Bassette, also from the same place.
Noah Bassette.
Noah Bassette. So, and can you give me the location, please, of the vineyard?
The address is 8011-8011 Foots Corners Road.
Okay, in
Interlaken.
Interlaken. So on Cayuga Lake, on the.
We're about a mile and a half in from the west side of Cayuga Lake.
All right, and I'll start with Pam. Could you explain your background? Did you have a history in agriculture?
Well, my grandfather was a dairy farmer, and we all did farming just as vegetable gardening, things like that. And my background was that I studied home economics, and I got a teaching degree in that.
Oh, okay. And Fred?
I grew up on this farm, which was, when I was growing up, a chicken farm. Dad had chickens and sold eggs. I went to Cornell, got an engineering degree, worked at Kodak for 30 years, retired early, and eventually we started the vineyard.
Okay. And Noah?
I don't really have much background before starting the vineyard. Everything I've learned has been from starting the vineyard and onwards. Before that, I was in the Navy for 5 years.
Oh, okay. So did you then grow up in Seneca County?
So my hometown is in Honeyway Falls, about an hour and a half west of here.
Alright.
But since having the family and everything out here, I'd spend a lot of time out here with all that.
So, Fred, you said your family farm was here. How many acres are on the farm?
There's a total of 85 acres, and we've got 18 of it now in vineyards.
And you had a long history of farming in your family, I take it. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little about that?
Sure. My grandfather bought this farm in 1918 and basically moved from the farm next door to this property. And this property went to my parents, and the other place went to Mom's sister. And so I grew up, with my aunt and uncle next door, and grew up on the farm before I went off to college. And then the farm stayed in the family until Mom died, and then we inherited it from her.
All right. So you went to Interlaken School?
Right, so I was in the first graduating class of South Seneca Central School
okay.
after the merger. So I went to Interlaken High School, and in the middle of the senior year, the class doubled, and we met all these new people, and yeah, it was a big change.
Right.
And this is actually the 50th reunion year for our class.
Right.
And then we went to
And what?
Pardon?
So what was growing on the farm? You said chickens.
So I believe that when Grandpa Fred bought it, some of it was in orchard. When Dad and Mom got it, he started a chicken business. And so the farm was all grown in crops to feed the chickens. And then when Dad, the chickens got sold in the 70s, and Dad continued to farm the land and sell the crops. And then when he got too old to continue farming, he started renting it out to an area farmer who farms about 1,000 acres in various places. So it was grain farmed until, and some of it still is. Some of it's still rented out and grain farmed, and we little by little are converting it into vines.
Vines. And your family name goes back, it has quite a long history in the area.
So I was recently looking into that. There was a Bassette that lived in another state, I think Connecticut, and he bought some land in this area, and he had 3 sons that moved to this area. I'm not sure that all 3 stayed here and their ancestors were here, but at least one of them did. And so there's been Bassettes in the Interlaken area since the early 1800s.
Wow.
So it's like a lot of other people, it's one of the family names that's on the roads.
Right.
There's a 1 mile stretch called Bassette Road.
right, and local history centers as well, Interlaken
Yeah,
Historical
yeah.
Society.
My cousin Diane is deeply involved in history stuff. If you want to know anything about Interlaken history, she's the one to ask.
Right, yeah, I know that. So, and Noah, do you want to talk about your background a little bit?
So, so after I got out of the Navy, we were planting the vineyard here, and while kind of working with that, I needed a job to pay the bills because this wasn't going to pay the bills to start off with. So I first started working at Lamberto Landing, and their tasting room, because I was like, well, I'll learn this while also learning some of that there, and that's when I got bit by the wine bug for sure. And I started learning as much as I could there in their tasting room and in their cellars, reading every book on wine I could find. And then after working there for a year, I went and started working at Buttonwood Grove. I was the tasting room manager there for a little over a year, while also helping in every other aspect that they needed, you know, in the cellars and the vineyards and all that. And then I left there and went to work at Damiani, and I've been there since, and again, done a little bit of everything, primarily in the tasting room, but also helping in a lot of their production stuff and vineyard work in the winter and all that. So all my education and background has been learning between a mix of all those places and then everything here.
Yeah, been very hands-on. And talking to so many of the winery owners, there seems to be such a good relationship between all of the owners and vineyard managers. Like if you need help or a tractor breaks down.
Right. The great thing about here that I love so much with the Finger Lakes and the community is that we are a community. Everybody's kind of helping each other, like with the vineyards especially, but also with other places like the breweries and the distilleries and like all the different restaurants and shops and everything. Everyone's kind of helping each other out.
Yeah,
which is
that's
great.
what I've heard. So Fred, then retire and move here and decide to, I'm going to start a vineyard.
Yeah. So I left Kodak in 2007 and did a few other things for a few years. And then around 2013 or 14, we knew we were going to, I mean, we always knew we were going to inherit the farm, but it was becoming probably more soon. And it's like, what are we going to do with this farm? Are we going to keep it? Are we going to sell it? Are we going to go live there? What are we going to do? And journeying through that process, we remembered how much our son-in-law Nate loves to grow things. It's like, gee, is there a way that they could basically make their living off of the farm somehow? And that's what led to the vineyard being the most, the best economic choice, so to speak. And so the basic plan was Pam and I would start it, and Nate and our daughter Adele and family would move up here and eventually take it over. At that point, it was just going to be growing grapes and selling grapes to other wineries. And then, as Noah said, he came out of the Navy and he got the wine bug, and that's when we started thinking, okay, maybe we want to start selling wine.
And what was here before? I know you talked about the farm. You had to do a lot of preparation, as I recall.
Yeah,
What was the land like?
So, the land was all being farmed and well taken care
Okay.
of in terms of growing crops. The buildings were in disarray for not being taken care of for a couple decades. So we called 2014 the demolition year. So literally Pam and I, tore down two barns, one big old post and beam barn that was falling down, and then there was a big cinder block barn that had the chickens in it, and we ultimately had somebody knock in, the roof was gone, we cleared out the roof, and we had a local individual knock the walls down and drive over the cinder blocks with his bulldozer and crush them all, and that became the foundation for the new pole barn that we had built. So that was all 2014 and 15, and then we started planting vines in 2015.
Okay, so
And I'll put a plug in for Cornell. We would not have planted in 2015 if it wasn't for all the help we got from Cornell. I wouldn't have been ready.
and what sort of you probably had to put in a lot of drain tiling.
The first 10 acres, we didn't add drainage. There was some existing field drains, and in hindsight, I wished I had put in more drainage in there, but the 10 acres are growing well. I can't really say there's a lot different than the newer acreage. So the last 6 acres in this field and where we started down the road at the other land, we had drainage put in by tile plow. And it definitely makes a difference.
But Cornell was really good with encouraging us, telling us varieties that would work.
Oh, yeah.
They came out and they did soil samples and just helped in so many ways that we didn't know anything about it, but we learned a lot.
Yeah, Cornell has a thing, as you know, Monica, called the Finger Lakes Grapes Project, which is primarily a small team of people that help the growers side of the winery business. And they have a person that's called an education specialist. And at that time, his name was Mike. And I just pestered the heck out of him on the phone. And he'd give me things to read and send me to websites. And so in like 2014, I just learned a ton about vineyards.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew about farms, but I didn't know about grapes.
Right.
But they were a wealth of assistance.
And our neighbor Bob.
Yeah,
Our neighbor Bob.
yeah. Neighbor Bob down the road
Another-
has 12 acres of vineyards, and he was a big help. Although not so much before we planted.
Right.
After we planted, he was a big help. You know, hey Bob, what do I do with this? And Bob introduced us to the vineyard manager for another winery, Damiani Winery, and Phil Davis came and said. He'd been buying grapes from our neighbor Bob, and Phil said, I know the grapes that come from Bob's farm, and your ground should be the same. And he initially said, I want to buy all your grapes for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I told him I don't want to sell all my product to one place. That's just not good business.
You're just starting
But
out.
Yeah.
Phil was a huge mentor in how to grow grapes. The first 2-3 years, he'd come by every few weeks, and we'd walk through the vineyard, and he'd say, do this, do that, here's a problem, you're doing good here. Because he wanted to make sure the first harvest that he got a lot of was
Yeah.
going to be good. So that's part of the cooperation that Noah spoke to. There's 2 or 3 vineyard managers that I can call up at any time and get good advice from.
Yeah, no, that's definitely what I've heard from everybody during the past 2 years of doing this project. So, what types of grapes went in initially? What did you plant?
So in the first year we planted Gewürztraminer and Riesling. The second year we planted Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. And then after a gap of a year or two, in 2017 we planted Lemberger. And then we said we weren't going to plant anymore until Nate and Adele moved here, but we ultimately changed our mind. And we planted, in 2020, we planted more Lemberger, more Cabernet Franc, and Chardonnay. And then last year we planted Saperavi and Arcatacelli.
Because
which
Noah said we had to.
You got to.
Well, I wanted to fill out the land that I have here, this field, and that was just over an acre. And then the folks from Hosmer that do custom planting by machine reminded me that the minimum planting is 2,000 vines. So it's like, if I'm going to pay for 2,000 vines, I'm going to plant 2,000 vines.
Right.
So that's how we ended up planting 1.5 acres of Arcatacelli down the road a bit.
And so the Hosmers planted them all with their, what is it, GPS, and you
They
you have
have-
a
they-
complete indication of where
Yeah.
everything is planted.
They
so-
have a GPS steered tractor with a planting machine on the back of it. They set up a base station. They say they're accurate to within an inch. So the roads are perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, makes any kind of machine work in the vineyard a whole lot easier.
Wow.
And they can now plant several thousand vines a day.
So this would have been in 2015, did you?
2015 was the first planting.
Okay, and it takes 3 years. When did you have your first harvest?
So the first harvest on the Riesling was in 2017. There had been a cold spring in 16 or 17, and we ended up not taking a harvest off the Gewürz until 2018. Yeah, Gewürz, they're a great grape. They make a great wine, but they are more cold sensitive.
Okay, and you've had you were talking about early bud break in one particular instance.
The winter of 2021-22 had a couple of really cold nights, and a lot of vineyards in the Finger Lakes have experienced bud mortality, which just basically means little or no grape harvest that year on those varieties.
All right. And so, who's harvesting all of the grapes?
So
Is it Noah?
Yeah.
no, the it's a combination of hand harvest using seasonal workers or machine harvest. Hosmer has a harvesting machine. You really need to get pretty big to justify buying your own harvesting machine. And then when you do, some of them do contract harvesting. And last year, Buttonwood also did harvesting for us because Hosmer was too busy, couldn't do it.
Couldn't keep up with it though.
Right.
Yeah. And so, when did you sell the first crop, and how much did you harvest? How many tons of grapes? Do you recall?
The first harvest was in the fall of 2017. I think we harvested 5 or 6 tons of Riesling that fall.
Wow.
The Rieslings have been, they grow well in the Finger Lakes. That's a well-known thing.
Right.
They've consistently produced well. And then we took the first Gewürztraminer harvest in 2018, and we probably took the first harvest on the Cab Sauv and the Cab Franc that year.
Yep.
Yeah, in the fall of that year.
Okay. And Saperavi does very well here. That originally from Georgia, I believe.
Yeah.
And that we'll maybe get a harvest this year if we're lucky, but definitely next year for sure we'll get some harvest on it.
The thing that I noticed on the vines we planted in 2020, besides drainage, there were some other things that we did that should have made them grown better, and they definitely did. And instead of waiting 2 years to take a harvest, we took a harvest last year off what was planted in 2020, a small amount. But again, one of my vineyard manager friends said, those vines are growing so good, you should take a harvest from them, otherwise you're going to have other issues. So the Arcaticellis, I am planning to take a harvest from this year. The Saperavi, I'm still not sure. There'll probably be a small harvest. They had some downy mildew damage late last year, so they kind of started a little slower this spring.
Wow. So who inspects the vines? Who's in charge of pruning and inspecting for pests? Or
That's primarily me.
you? Okay.
But anybody that I have helping in the vineyard, I tell them to look, because it's basically, if you see anything growing that's not green, tell me. It's
Right.
pretty much what it is. And if you see a lot of bugs, tell me. So when the seasonal workers go through, or
And once again, so altogether, you probably mentioned it. How many acres of vines do you currently have established?
Yeah, we currently have just under 18 acres.
Okay.
We'll harvest off of, well, we would have harvest off the 15 of them this year, except we won't take a harvest on the Gewürz because of the winter damage. And if we take a harvest off the Arcaticellis, that'll be another 1.5 acres, although it'll be a small harvest. And then hopefully next year we'll be taking the harvest off all 18 acres, which means generally with the kind of grapes that we're growing for wine production, you try to manage the harvest to around 4 to 5 tons per acre.
Oh, okay. And you have a farm winery license now?
Yes,
Do you want to talk about that when you got your license? And
So the submittal process with New York State for the farm winery license is slow. Some of that I think was due to the pandemic, but I submitted the application in October. They didn't even review the application until March or April, and we got approval in April. But the good thing is, for the farm winery license, the same time you submit it in the full application, you can also submit for a temporary license. And that came through approved in 3 weeks, which is what I was told would happen. It said, you'll have your temporary in 3 to 4 weeks. And then when they finally review it, they'll ask for more information. And once they started reviewing it, it got approved in about a month.
oh, good.
So we were officially fully approved in April, I believe. Yeah.
And you're making wine now. Who's
So-
who's the winemaker?
So we have somebody else making the wine.
Okay.
And the general courtesy is you don't tell who you're having make your wine or who somebody's making wine for. But a lot of the smaller vineyards and even some of the medium-sized vineyards, somebody else makes the wine for them. There's a huge investment in equipment and hiring a winemaker.
Now, is that a long-term or long-range plan for you to have a winemaking facility here and then bottling?
It's in the thought process.
Okay.
My guess is we would never have a bottling line. There are people that have a bottling line in a truck,
Mm-hmm.
and they come to your site and you pump it in and give them empty bottles, and it comes back out full bottles, corks, and the works. And a bottling line is actually quite expensive,
Right.
so you got to have a fair volume before it makes more sense economically to buy one yourself.
So
No,
you had your first vintage. Do you want to talk about? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
no.
I was going to say with our winemaking process, even though it's made at another place, we still do have a hand in it.
Okay.
do.
So what I do, I mean, before the harvest, when we get close to harvest, we know what we're going to be harvesting, and we kind of like lay out a game plan of like, we're going to make these different wines. This is how it's going to be. So we tell them that beforehand. So when we bring the grapes in, they know what the plan is. And then also throughout different stages in the process, we'll do like wine. We'll do tastings to do different blending trials and just different stages. So it's not like we just send them the grapes and they send us back bottles. There is a communication and all that going on to make sure we get the
I know it takes care of all that.
yeah.
Constant
Okay.
monitoring.
Yeah.
Constant. Okay.
And the bottling line is so much fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I imagine when we get our tasting room built and we have a basement in it that we could do wine production in, we would start out doing some small scale, like one variety of wine, maybe a specialty wine in some way. We would have someone else press the grapes and then bring the juice back here, and we'd do the rest of the process, and then either take it somewhere to have it bottled or have the bottling line in the truck come here and bottle it.
Right.
Wait
That
and
seems
see.
to be the wave of the, to do it that way, to have a bottling.
Yeah.
And as far as the tasting room, your plan is to have it in the former homestead,
Right.
correct?
So the farm has an old farmhouse built in the 1840s, and we will tear down some of it and keep some of it and add on the details we're still working on, but we'll have that as our tasting room. So it'll be
Oh,
right next to, so to speak, the barn, a good view of the vineyard.
now you have your first vintage has been bottled and is available, correct?
And actually the second, Noah can
Yeah,
Noah can
Noah,
speak
do
to
you want to
that.
talk about
Yeah. So our first vintage that we made was from 2020. We made 2 wines, a Riesling, semi-dry Riesling, and a Cab Franc, barrel-aged, nice dry Cab Franc. Since 2020 was a great year, those are fantastic wines. I actually sent them off to 2 different places to get rated and scored and all that. And between all that, we had the Cab Franc got rated at 88 points, and the Riesling got rated at 89 points.
Oh, great.
So we knew we liked them already, but it was great to see from basically a no-name winery in the Finger Lakes getting those good high scores to start off with. It's doing good. And then from 21, we made a bunch of other wines as well, and those, all but one of them are out and ready for sale as well. We have a semi-dry Riesling, a normal Gewürz, a bubbly Gewürz, a Gewürz and Riesling blend, and then we have a dry Riesling that's not ready yet. And then we're going to be making 3 reds from 21 as well.
And we also have the rosé.
Oh, and the rosé as well. That's right.
Rosé,
Our
right.
Cab Franc rosé, and then we'll have some Cab Franc and some Lemberger ready in the late fall, early winter. But all those whites are out and ready.
And
And
Right.
the rosé, yeah.
the dry Riesling will be ready for sale soon.
Soon, yeah. That's still needs.
Another week or two probably.
Yeah, it needs a little more time, but it's
Oh, okay.
no more of the wine.
And we submitted the 2020 Riesling and Cab Franc to the New York Wine Classic competition.
Yeah.
And they both got a silver.
Oh, wow.
Which
That's
again,
really,
is-
that's really an accomplishment.
Yeah, I was talking with Peter Weiss. Peter got the Winery of the Year award in the New York Wine Classic competition. And I told him what happened with us. He goes, great, you'll get Winery of the Year in 5 years.
Yeah, because for them, they're 5 years old and they got Winery of the Year. Like they opened in 2017 in a little shed or little school
Right.
building, and they from then till now have grown hugely and have been a great success, and they're great over there. And they won Winery of the Year.
That's an
So,
amazing story, and I can't believe the size of your vines. I'm looking at them here to think that they, went in, pretty recently, as far as vineyards are, and it's just amazing that you've come so far in so little time.
Vines grow like mad.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And so you're having a big event soon, a tasting room. You're going to have it somewhere, correct? Or
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, August 6th, we're doing an open house here at the winery, which is basically, well, we've been trying to figure out where we're going to do the tasting space and tasting room stuff, where we just decided we want to do some kind of event while we still have the wine and have people come over and taste. So it's technically open to the public, but I've been kind of more reaching out to like local people and industry people to bring them over, try the wine, kind of introduce ourselves to the area, and just kind of like let people know that we're here and we're making good wine.
And it's going to be right here on the porch.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right
on the porch
here.
of the barn.
The back side of the porch has an overhang that until now has been used to store various things. So we cleared it out and set up some tables, and we're gonna start doing scheduled tastings like
Nowish. Yeah.
nowish.
Yeah.
And when we have the open house, we'll probably either have a tent or we have another covered area that we may use to do it. But
so
we got-
this will be, it's an estate winery then, correct? All the grapes are produced. Do you buy any grapes at all in your wines? They're all produced here on the.
I believe we can say we're an estate winery.
Yeah, estate. Well, on some of the technicality stuff, because we're not estate bottled, because it's not bottled
That's true.
Right.
on site,
Oh,
but
no.
the grapes are all estate grown grapes.
Right.
So all the wine is made from
100% your
Yeah.
Yep.
produce then.
Yep.
Vineyard.
And we will next year. The busy project will be getting the tasting room built. I expect in another couple of years we will plant some more grapes, get a couple more varieties. I want to get a little more Riesling in the ground.
And then especially since that the other site that we'll be planting at, it'll be fun, especially with the Riesling, because it'll be two different areas, and we can see potentially if there's little differences in the soils and all kinds of fun winemaking
Right.
stuff you can do with that.
Right, because the soil, as far as the soil, from what I understand, it can vary from one spot of
Right.
one vineyard to another. So is that
Yeah.
true, or your soil types?
So, knowing the success that our friend Bob had down the road, and he's sold his grapes to well-known area wineries, and they've made single variety wines from them and won awards. So that gave us a lot of confidence, and the soil testing and other information, talking with Cornell, gave us confidence this was a good site to grow grapes on, to grow wine grapes on.
All right.
And we can plant up to about 40 acres without having to do much more prep work.
Oh, good.
A little
'Cause
bit,
it's all in crops right now.
yeah,
Corn,
yeah. Little by little,
soybeans.
little by little, I tell the guy who's renting the farm, I'm gonna plant more grapes, so you'll have a little less to rent.
And how many cases were produced? Your first.
So we've
vintage,
got,
can we
right
call?
now, we've got about 750 cases
Mhm.
of the whites from this year and the year before, and we still have some of the Cabernet Franc from 2020. And then there's another in the fall when the reds get bottled. I think there's 300 or 400 cases.
Oh,
And we had enough grapes harvested from 2021 to make around 12 or 1,300 cases. So we really want to get selling them.
All right, so I guess I can ask each of you, what keeps you up at night? What has been your greatest concern to the vineyard? I'll start with Pam.
Oh boy. Well, it depends on what year it is. When we put in I don't know what year it was, but we had so much dry weather,
2016.
2016, that it's how are we going to make sure that they have enough water? Because we don't have irrigation. And so Fred devised a way behind the Kubota that we would have a big tank, and then he made water wands so that we would drive along, and then as we lowered the water wand, the water would come out. It was all gravity fed. So it just depends on what the year is. I mean, I could get worried about bugs or a disease, downy mildew, the weather conditions.
Spotted lanternfly.
Oh, yeah, don't think about them.
Okay,
They're not
I
here yet.
won't.
We don't want them. But, yeah, and then, but I'm not in the vineyard every day, so so I just make sure that my husband stays healthy because he's in the vineyard every day.
Okay, so any comments in the same question?
So, since I'm doing the vast majority of the work in the vineyard, I use seasonal workers for most of the hand-oriented work. But all the rest of the work, it's just me. So one of the worries is if anything happens to me, it's a big problem. So I'll be really glad when son-in-law Nate gets up here.
Or someone else learns the tractor.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the tractor work.
And sometime in the next year or two, Noah will become full-time for the whole operation. And as he said, he's learned in other places, all aspects. He'll be working in the fields and working in the tasting room.
Driving tractor?
Driving tractors, probably.
Wow, it's remarkable, to me, and I think most people listening to this, that someone would begin such an enormous venture post-retirement with no ag experience per se in a winery or vineyard. So
We've had a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Yeah. So, one of the reasons for that is when when we inherited something as big as this farm and you're trying to decide what to do with it, part of having any material assets is you want to leave them to your children or whoever, you want to pass on an inheritance. So, you can wait until you die and give your kids some money, hopefully, or you can take the money now and make something that they very much would like to have instead of
Or increased value.
well, yeah. Well, and as another winery owner told me, well, yeah, even if that never happens, you've just made a great real estate investment because you've taken the land and greatly increased its value by turning it into a vineyard.
Well, after getting bit by the wine bug and enjoying this so much, I've kind of run with that and the whole aspect of like, this is like all my work here and what I want to do in the future with all of it is like, this isn't just a day job for me. This is what I want to do for the next 30, 40 years. So I'm trying to grab onto it with both hands.
Yeah.
right,
And-
committed to the industry and
Like this is an investment in my future.
right. It must be a obligation too to maintain the family name, family farm. You must feel a sense of responsibility too, Fred.
Yeah. And part of what we're doing is you're starting a business that hopefully will continue for a few generations as a family, fundamentally a family business, as long as somebody wants to do it. And although Nate and Noah have been the two that have done the most, all our kids are helping. Our oldest son is a self-employed computer person, and he's doing all the website work and some other computer-oriented stuff. Our other son, Josh, is just about finishing a master's degree and going to go into teaching. But when he's not working in the summer, he comes and works in the vineyard some, and he actually loves to do it. Out there working in the vineyard, other than when it's terribly hot, it's kind of a peaceful place to work,
Now it's a beautiful sight, and you can see Cuba Lake in the distance. It's just very
So I imagine eventually Noah and Nate and Adele's family, this will be their full-time employment, and then Josh and Danny will have some involvement on the side.
Oh, okay. So the one question, would you do it all again? I mean, I've seen you did have a program at the library, and you had wonderful footage of the entire process. And I know people were just amazed that it went from just land to this incredible vineyard, and all the work that went into it and the steps and.
I'd do it again. There'd be things obviously that you'd do different. I probably wouldn't have planted the Cabernet Sauvignons. I would have planted something else. You learn along the way, and I mean each planting I've done something different because of what I've learned along the way. That makes the vines grow better, makes them easier to take care of. And along the way, you learn about equipment to buy that basically reduces your dependence on seasonal workers because they're not getting more abundant, they're getting less abundant.
Right. Work has been, with the pandemic, certainly, I know in tasting rooms and other aspects, it's been, really difficult
Yeah.
for restaurants. And
Yeah.
you probably know better than anybody, Noah.
Yeah, for sure. The staffing issues at the
Staffing.
different wineries is always a challenge for sure.
And the pandemic didn't really impact the availability to get work done in the vineyard. It only had a very minimal impact on getting seasonal workers. Some of them would get COVID and couldn't work for a while, but in general, you could get what you needed. But I was also buying some equipment to do with equipment instead of doing it by hand. And part of that's an economic decision, just it saves money in the long run, but also you can do the work when you want to do the work. You don't have to wait for a crew to show up, which can be
Very beneficial.
yeah, you
Right.
can't sometimes. There was a year about 3 years ago where something that needed to be done was done about a month late because it simply couldn't get workers
Right.
in here.
Yeah.
And-
No, I've heard that from,
Yeah.
many restaurant owners, tasting room
Yeah.
managers. It's,
Would you like to know where we got our name from?
I was just about to ask. I was looking, did you see me looking at his shirt? Because I always ask, what's the significance of
Yeah.
the name?
So back in sometime in the 50s, my dad was very interested in flying and had gotten his license and wanted to buy a plane and have it on the farm. And so he put in a short, small grass runway on the farm. It's down the road and it's in front of where we built our house. And that is called Airy Acres Airport. That's
Oh.
the name he came up with. It's still on the aviation maps. It's still a legal private airport. And we were trying to come up with a name, and it was like, oh, why don't we call it Airy Acres Vineyard?
Yeah.
So
That's
we,
great.
as far as I know, we're the only vineyard winery in the Finger Lakes with an airport.
Okay.
I haven't found another one yet.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always the question I try to get in. And then I was looking at the shirt. I was like,
Yeah.
And then for the logo,
right,
what looks like you might think is a leaf, it's actually a propeller.
right. I see that now.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
the guy that designed the logo came up with that idea.
Yeah, now I really, see it. That's wonderful. So would anyone like to add any further comments or Noah?
Well, you asked the question of like what keeps us up at night.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing that this is kind of that's my piece of the pie. What I'm focused on, and the big thing for me is to selling the wine, but also selling it right. Because I want to focus on selling the wine. So like my worries are always about how are we gonna get a tasting space going like we're doing and making sure we do it right because we want to give people a good experience. And then also with the wines, I don't want to sell them too early when they're not ready yet. And also, I like to hold on to some of our wines because I like the idea of aging wine, of course, too. So putting some of our wine away and make sure that we can have that for a later time because people like that as well. So just all those focuses on making sure that we're selling enough wine.
Right, the archival or library, wine library.
Right. Yeah. There's a number of wineries around here that have really nice library wine selections for their club members or what have you. And I really like that aspect. And so already I'm like, well, we only have a few cases of this left. We should put that away and save it for another time. We definitely need to sell wine to make money to keep the process going, but you also kind of want to be focused on the future because that's also my big thing is I'm focusing on the future and the long-term realities of the winery and wanted to make sure that we keep that all in mind.
Right, sustain
Balance.
and
And
keep them and compare, go back and
Right.
compare progress or changes.
Exactly, and kind of just the way that we do things now to keep the future in mind so that we're going to be building a tasting room. So well, where's that going to be? Which we've decided where it's going to be. But make sure that we do it right with the idea that we'll eventually be growing. We don't want to get huge, but we will have some growth, and we want to be able to build a space that will be big enough and function well enough for that growth in the future.
Right, none of this would have been possible without the Farm Winery Act.
No,
Right,
no,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So New York
Absolutely.
State really did a tremendous thing to
Certainly did.
pass that law in
Sure did.
1976.
And when you look at the different kinds of licenses related to the sale of alcohol in New York State, the farm winery license is a double win-win. There's, I don't know, 30 or 40 different licenses that you can get from New York State, and they sort of all relate to different combinations of selling by the glass, selling by the bottle, selling with food served, selling to consume on site versus selling to consume off site, taken home and consumed. The farm winery license can do it all. You can grow your grapes, make your wine, sell your wine by tastings, by glass, by bottle, serve food with it. And it's one of the lowest cost licenses that the state has. So the people that developed it and negotiated it with the state back in the 70s
Right,
did an awesome job.
right.
It's-
Marianne Krupsak, Lieutenant Governor, was very involved with that. I know I've interviewed James Doolittle as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
it really saved, the grape growers, because the grapes were literally,
Yeah.
rotting on the vines when they, the sales and sale orders dropped.
Well, in a way, it's kind of saved the economy of the region as a whole too. I mean, it changed it as well, but still, like it's made this area into a great place for people to visit, and it helped keep the economy afloat. Like especially like after, like I think of Geneva, and when the Navy base left Sampson, all those people that were at the base are gone, and so the city, didn't have much as a big of economy attached to it. But now with the Finger Lakes, and people can go there and visit and stay in Geneva while visiting all the lakes. Like it's all connected.
Right,
Um,
B&B's, restaurants,
Yeah.
because the economy was hit with the loss of Willard Psychiatric and
Right.
All that, yeah.
Yeah.
The domino economic effect of the wineries in terms of restaurants and B&Bs and motels and hotels, it's huge.
The hospitality industry.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
No, it's been incredible. Well, I thank you all for
Thank
your
you.
time. Thank you, Pam, Fred, and Noah Bassette of Airy Acres Vineyard in Interlaken, New York. My name is Monica Wilkinson Kelly. Today is July 21st, 2022. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really a fascinating story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.